Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Professor Hall, and we are talking about My Dark Vanessa. This is the second in our lecture series. Here, we're going to be talking about the book Lolita and Intertextuality. If you have not already seen the first part of this lecture series, I really encourage you to go back and do so. We talk about we give an overview of the novel, we go into some characterization, some major themes, and I talk about narcissism and the cycle of narcissistic abuse, particularly as it relates to child sexual abuse. So, trigger warning, we are going to talk about abuse, exploitation, and rape, and we are using those words while we talk about it, in part because they're difficult things to talk about, but we should call things what they are. And if that triggers you and you're in my class, again, there is an alternate book for you to read if you want to do that. I really don't want to force anybody to read this book because it can be difficult for some people. And for other people, it can be really healing. And for many people, it can be both. So I just want to kind of, be sensitive to that. So, having said that, let's get into it. What is an illusion? Initially, I was going to have this entire lecture be all of the illusions, but I just broke it up into two, in part because the first lecture went a little long. So we're just going to focus on Lolita today. An illusion is a brief, purposeful reference to something, a person, place, event, work of literature, song, etc., that's outside of the book. A loose definition that you might sometimes see if you look up like what's an illusion, it'll just say like a reference to something not in the book, and you're like, what does that even mean? But basically, these are things that are subtly dropped into the narrative, and they're not usually commented on in any further way. So for example, two characters are fighting about money. The first character says, "You're a real Scrooge." And that's an allusion to Ebenezer Scrooge, a miserly character in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Most people would understand that reference. The characters would likely not comment on it again, right? They're not going to say, because in the beginning of The Christmas Carol, Scrooge was super miserly and didn't want to pay his workers good wages or give, whatever. They're not going to go into all of that detail, right? It's just a brief mention, and then they keep talking about things. In contrast, intertextuality is a specific type of illusion in which there's a deeper relationship between two texts. So this could be a play, a myth, a story, a song, a book, a film, whatever. So the first text, that's the book that you're reading, that might borrow or share ideas, themes, quotations, maybe even a character to comment on that second text that originally had that myth or that story or that character or that theme, and kind of try to create a new meaning. So the first text might not reference the second text directly, but the connection is usually a longer one. So here is an example. The Lion King is a loose interpretation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So Hamlet isn't referenced in the film. They don't say like, hey, you're being just like Hamlet, right? But what we have instead is a young prince whose father has died, whose uncle is trying to take over the kingdom, and whose uncle is also trying to marry the prince's mother, and the prince goes on a journey to kind of wrestle with those ideas, right? That is the general plot outline, and by sharing some of those plot points, it creates that intertextuality. Now, other times, the work might refer back directly to this reference. It might make a direct connection. For example, the play Pygmalion, that was later turned into the musical My Fair Lady, references directly Pygmalion in the title. It references the myth of a man who is a sculptor and is trying to sculpt or kind of create this shape of a perfect woman, right? So that's basically what intertextuality is. It's a deeper relationship, and it's woven throughout the text, not just one brief mention. So a brief summary of Lolita, if you have not read the book or seen the movie adaptations. Many readers find Lolita a disturbing book, and I am one of them. I will say that there are many others who would say that that's a misreading of the book and that the book really symbolizes other things. Or they might also say that the book is beautifully written and it has this gorgeous language, which it does. But that's also, to me, part of the problem. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox on that. The narrator, Humbert, is an unreliable narrator, which means that essentially he has a warped view of what is going on and many times is lying to the reader while he's talking. He also attempts to make himself look like a victim. So again, if you saw the first lecture, we have some of that narcissism and especially that vulnerable or covert narcissism taking place in the book Lolita as well. In reality, this middle-aged man, Humbert, becomes obsessed with and abuses a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, whom he nicknames Lolita. Humbert marries Lolita's mother to stay close to the girl, and after her mother's sudden death, he takes Lolita on a journey across the United States, during which he manipulates and controls her. She becomes frustrated with her powerlessness and tries to escape by marrying another man. And tragically, Humbert murders Dolores's new husband. So the novel explores themes of obsession, manipulation, and child abuse, but only through the eyes of the abuser. And again, those eyes and that perspective are extremely warped. Here's an excerpt. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita, the tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap it 3 on the teeth. Lolita. She was low, plain low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in 1 sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Did she have a precursor? She did. Indeed, she did. In point of fact, there might have been no Lolita at all had I not loved one summer a certain initial girl child. So this is of the girl child a little bit later in that same chapter. All at once, we were madly, clumsily, shamelessly, agonizingly in love with each other. Hopelessly, I should add, because that frenzy of mutual possession might have been assuaged only by our actual imbibing and assimilating every particle of each other's soul and flesh. But there we were, unable to even mate as slum children would have so easily found an opportunity to do. After one attempt, we made to meet at night in her garden. I also know the shock of Annabelle's death, so that's the girl child, consolidated the frustration of that nightmare summer, made of it a permanent obstacle to any further romance throughout the cold years of my youth. So, what's going on here? We see Humbert describing Lolita. He tries to manipulate the reader into feeling sympathy for him by telling the story of Annabelle, this girl he loved in his childhood who died tragically young. We also see his attempts to justify his pedophilia with these long-winded explanations of the legalities of the definition of a child, which come a little bit later in that chapter. He says, I wish to introduce the following idea. Between the age limits of 9 and 14, there occur maidens who, to certain bewitched travelers, twice or many times older than they, reveal their true nature, which is not human but nymphic, that is, demonic. And these chosen creatures I propose to designate as nymphets. So just after this, he compares nymphets to sirens who tempt a sailor, but you see some of the words that I should have put creatures in bold as well. They're maidens, they bewitch people with their true nature, which is actually demonic. They're like the sirens who would tempt people to crash upon the rocks. And all of these statements demonstrate that he's attempting to justify his horrific actions by victim blaming. right? We also see, and I don't have this on the slide, but I will say the whole first paragraph of this book is this narrator redefining Dolores by trying to give her a new name. To her friends, she's low on the dotted line, meaning when she has to sign her name, right? She's Dolores. That's her official name. Other people call her various nicknames, but this is my special name for her, right? So he's trying to recreate her in his own image. This is the actress, Sue Lyon, with the producer of the film Lolita, who was rumored to have abused her during and after the film as well. So the book has often been misread, as I said. Many people don't realize that Humbert is an unreliable narrator. We're supposed to understand that his view on young girls is warped. In his fantasy, he is lying to himself, the reader, and also Dolores, not to mention her mother. So they're literal children, and he's painting them as seductive, bewitching, demonic, wayward, girls who, quote, habitually associate with vicious or immoral persons, as if it's on them for associating with men like him, right? He's given her a new name. Dolores is not a child or a girl. She's a nymphette, a demon kind of creature put on the earth to tempt him and to serve for his fantasy and his pleasure. The reason I would say that people misread this is that they think like, oh yes, he's correct, and this girl, Dolores, Lolita, did seduce him. Like, we're really supposed to understand that that's not what's happening at all. She is not a seductress. She's 12 and probably just trying to live her 12-year-old life before he kidnaps her. So, intertextuality in My Dark Vanessa. The book is really intricately tied to the novel My Dark Vanessa. Strain begins giving Vanessa inappropriate attention, saying he can kind of mentor her as a promising poet and writer. As part of the grooming process, he gives her a number of other works that we'll talk about later, but in particular, his annotated copy of Lolita. It's definitely supposed to be a way for her to read a story that is shaped by a predator, to see herself through the predator's eyes and to draw a direct comparison between this relationship between Humbert and Lolita and herself and her teacher. One critic explains about Lolita: Nabokov allows his lecherous narrator to speak in language that is once lyrical, elevating, and sweeping. He rhapsodizes about his own prepubescent sex fantasy. Unless the reader is careful to separate the amoral actions of the narrator from his heightened language, the reader can get caught up in the masquerading of pedophilia as grand love, and in particular, in My Dark Vanessa, this is what basically happens to Vanessa. It's a beautifully written book. It's written almost like poetry. To her, this is a sign that she and Strain are Humbert and Lolita. Their love is acceptable and at the same time kind of forbidden or salacious. So again, kind of reflecting this pattern that society has of double standards. It's forbidden, but it's desirable. It's acceptable, but it's not acceptable. And it confuses people, particularly young people like Vanessa. So it also serves as a framework for the novel. In My Dark Vanessa, we have the inversion of Lolita. It's a post-Me Too movement novel, which we finally get to hear from Lolita. We get her thoughts and feelings about what happened to her. But in part because Vanessa has been groomed by Nabokov's work, and in part because she's been in regular contact with her abuser over the course of these 17 years, so she's still in contact with him at 32, her narration is still being colored by both Lolita, the novel, and Strain's warped view on things like boundaries, sexuality, power, control. Even about Vanessa herself, she really often sees herself through this lens that Strain has put on her, thinking of herself as a criminal, a seductress, a person who could ruin her abuser, who must not ever talk or say what actually happened. So it's kind of like we see Lolita trying to find her identity, but having that identity continually shaped and molded by her abuser, even in adulthood. And toward the second half, or toward the end of the novel, Vanessa kind of breaks from this in certain ways to try to heal. Now, what I find interesting, not to spoil the book, but we don't have a happy pat ending where everything is fine. We really have her realizing that now it's time to take like the next steps on her journey toward becoming kind of a fully realized adult. So Lolita in film, the movies are also mentioned, and Vanessa and Strain even watch the films together. Again, a way is kind of perpetuating and justifying his abuse. She knows that he likes these movies and these types of movies and really seeks them out. I want to note here that the author of Lolita, I put the author of Lolita, not My Dark Vanessa, Vladimir Nabokov, wanted a 12-year-old actress to play Lolita in the movies. In both versions, she was played by an older actress, so Sue Lyon was 14 when cast, but I think 15 and then 16 through the filming of the movie. It was done by Kubrick. He took a really long time filming it. And then 16 in the 1997 adaptation. Sue Lyon said that the role traumatized her. She knew she was cast because she was well developed. The producer, James Harris, who again was rumored to have assaulted her, he stated in an interview at the time, "We made sure when we cast her that she was a definite sex object. Not something that could be interpreted as being perverted." So they particularly chose a girl who was still young, but who had some curves and was a little bit more developed in terms of like having breasts, having a waist, that kind of thing. So that the book wouldn't be or the movie version wouldn't be looked at as being perverted, even though the point of the book is that it is perverted, right? So this is really problematic. Again, it's something that's in the culture and affecting people who are then watching the movie where it kind of looks like it's okay. And I'm going to say, before I get to Lyon's comment, that this is not only just in this 1962 movie, okay? We have very often, in part because, yes, if they cast people in high school to play people in high school and TV, then you'd have to hire like tutors and things like that, and you wouldn't be able to do certain storylines. But again, you wouldn't be able to do certain storylines. And they have on television very sexualized storylines that are supposed to be about teenagers, featuring people who are sometimes like 90210 had a person on there who was 32. Other people were 28, 29. The same thing with shows like Pretty Little Liars, Gossip Girl, that one with Archie. Is it called Archie? Riverdale? I forgot the name of it. But you have all of that, right? In part to somewhat normalize these sexual situations while also kind of acknowledging like, yeah, we can't have actual teenagers in these sexual situations. So it is confusing for younger people, I think, especially. But Lyon commented, "My destruction as a person dates back from that movie. Lolita exposed me to temptations no girl of that age should undergo. I defy any pretty girl who was rocketed to stardom at 14 in a sex nymphette role to stay on a level path thereafter." And she just passed away recently, but for many, many years, she did struggle because people viewed her as a sexual object and tried to kind of put her in that role. And then also, like Vanessa in the novel, as she became 25, 35, 45, 50, she didn't look like that younger, hypersexualized child. And so she kind of struggled with that as well. How do you reconcile the fact that you are aging and people have only seen you as a sexual object and not as a whole realized person? And now that people no longer maybe see you that way, what does that mean? And who are you if not that thing, right? So here are some pictures. This is Sue Lyon. This is Dominique Swain in the other version. Again, we call this the male gaze, seeing things through the male point of view and the male lens, looking at the female body in a hypersexualized way. I added this picture because this is the actress that from a French movie. This is the actress that Vladimir Nabokov wanted to star in Lolita. And they said no, because then it would make things look too perverted. And I can't imagine, this was a little comedic movie from France. Nothing is going on here. This is her friend or her father, I think, picking her up in the middle of a Union Station, a train station. But yeah, I can't imagine if the movie had starred that girl, what might have happened, or maybe if people would have interpreted it correctly. So next time we're going to talk about other allusions throughout the novel. But I hope you got a better understanding of what precisely Lolita is about and how it's affecting the characters in My Dark Vanessa. Thanks, everybody.